start now.
Okay.
Let me introduce Lynn Collins to the rest of you. She's been a friend of mine for some time, and I was very happy when she said she'd be willing to talk about what it was like to be a member of League in Texas. So, take it away, Lynn.
Okay, well, first of all, I moved to Lubbock, Texas in 1962. I had never voted because in 1960 I was 20 and you had to be 21 to vote. So when I moved to Texas, I had never voted. I immediately registered to vote by paying my poll tax.
Oh my God.
I do not remember how much it was. It wasn't a lot, but it was some money, and therefore a hardship for some people, particularly minorities, and undoubtedly a way to suppress minority votes. My husband's name, and some of you know, is the unusual name of Jacqueline. My poll tax was issued Mrs. Jacqueline Collins. And then I went to vote in a local election, and we went to the school, and we sat at the cafeteria tables with our neighbors next to us and on the other side with our paper ballots, and thus your neighbors knew exactly how you voted. There were no booths for voting, no privacy.
How big is Lubbock?
Well, Lubbock then was probably about 200,000. Now, people think, West Texas is the boondocks, but it actually, even then, was about 200,000, and it's, I don't know, 600,000 or 700,000 now. And the school has the misleading name of Texas Tech, but that was in fact, and this is relevant, it was in fact a broad-based university, liberal arts, engineering, agriculture, home economics, and they were beginning to hire the faculty for the planned coming medical school. The law school did not come till later and really wasn't thought about it at that point. Because I had completed half of law school at the University of Illinois and left law school to marry Jack and move to West Texas. But the fact that it's a broad-based university and a large university meant there were all of these faculty members. And they had wives who were highly educated people and skilled people and smart people. But because it was a time when women were not encouraged to work, they were not working, and most of their children were already in school. And thus there was a pool of valuable League of Women Voters members. And the League, just as now, was very much nonpartisan, and lots of capable women to serve on their committees. They got rid of through their influence, the poll tax was eliminated, and first they managed to persuade government to at least 5 voting booths and ultimately voting machines.
The League did that?
The influence of the League brought about the elimination throughout the state, brought about the getting rid of the poll tax, and locally got the governments to fund first the voting booths and then ultimately voting machines. I joined the League of Voters fairly early. One of the things that the League did was to issue the voting guides. And the voting guides for virtually all of the elections were extremely popular on a nonpartisan basis and very much in demand when they were printed. And another thing that they did was to hold a statewide, and I don't I only remember one of these, but there was a statewide candidate forum. Oh, and by the way, about those voting guides, all of the candidates, because of the influence and the popularity of the guide, all of the candidates responded to the questionnaires. So they were very complete. And then they decided to schedule a statewide candidates rally, which was televised on a statewide basis. It was held in Lubbock. I was on a committee, and various ones were assigned to meet the candidates and get them on the camera at the correct time. I was assigned to meet this young man named George Bush, who was running ultimately unsuccessfully. I forget whether it was the U.S. House or the Senate, but he was not elected. This was a time when Texas was in transition from being straight Democratic, conservative Democrats to candidates announcing that they were going to be Republican, and George was one of those. I wasn't, but all of the candidates had been told that the time, and they all, by the way, 100% of them accepted the invitations and came to this televised candidate forum. They were all advised in advance that their time to be on camera was final, and no matter how early they got, that was going to be their time. Some of the Democrats candidates threw temper tantrums. George did not, which I appreciated. And I met him when he arrived about 15 or 20 minutes early, and we chatted, and I got him to the camera on time. And that's the only time I've ever met him. Even when he was later in my governor, and I was in a state agency, and didn't meet him then. But at any rate, he was polite. Now we talked about the women not being encouraged to work at that time. But of course, one of our members went on to found the food bank in Lubbock. Another one went on to found and run the women's shelter. And my good friend Betty Anderson was a longtime chapter president. From that, she went on to be the Texas president, and then to be the president of the National League. Wow. And you might have encountered her name, but this was a long time ago.
So they did unpaid.
At any rate, the influence was, and of course many of the members did over time. They were educated people, they had professions, and gradually they did become part of the workforce. So I'm sure my time is up.
I wasn't running the clock on you then.
Okay, I had little kids, so a lot of things I don't remember, but what I do remember is I always went to Knapp when they had the elections. So Knapp had Sherman Township and had Stanton Township, and so we were observers. And it was really neat because we got to meet a lot of the regular people who were there year after year after year, and I saw them year after year after year. So that was very interesting and fun. Another thing that I remember is that because of League, I became very aware that if you want to know what's going on, you better either go to or find out about the township meetings, the school board meetings, the county board meetings, etc. I ended in the 80s being a school board member, and I'm so glad I'm not a school board member now.
Was that here in the
Menominee, yeah, right, Menominee. I've been in Menominee since '63, for goodness sakes. But I was not born there. I'm older than that. And so that was very, very important. And just going to those meetings or being aware of those meetings is crucial. Now what else? I also remember we talked about nuclear power. We talked about the power kind of stuff, and I remember that the league decided that the best way to do things was to go with nuclear power. I didn't do any of that leading, but I was surprised. But obviously, we had study groups. You met really neat people, and you became informed. And another thing I remember are the candidates forums. You hoped, number one, that the people would show up, the candidates would show up. When I ran for school board, there were 12 of us. And then you hoped somebody was in the audience because we didn't have the technology or anything else. And you also hoped they might answer because we had newspapers back then when you had questions and when you answered them, and then you could maybe find out what people felt. So I just thought it was an information gathering, not nonpartisan organization, and I was glad to be part of it. Okay, that's it.
But that's a hard act to follow.
Yeah, I'm just loud.
Yeah, nice, strong.
Well, from what I remember, I too had little kids, and most of the other leaguers had small children because we weren't working then.
For pay.
For pay, you're right. We weren't working for pay, that's right. But what I recall from league more than anything, and it was an eye-opener, was that leaguers gathered and discussed the information that they had found in their individual and through a small, pair research. We discuss it, lay it out, and not agree, but come to a consensus. That's what league is all about. Not lockstep agreement, not a lockstep single idea, but a consensus. And we would move the consensus up to state, and state moved it on from there. I remember doing a study, belonging to a study group, and we would assign one, sometimes two, study areas. And the whole league would cooperate in doing research on those areas. And the one that I was most active in with Shirley Melrose, God rest her soul, was the study for the Cedar Falls School and where schools should be located and which schools needed to be retired, improved or retired. And we brought that evidence, we gathered, discussed it, came to consensus, and brought the study to the school board to decide later. And we had to live with the results. They didn't follow our recommendation, but one of the things that I also remember is fundraising for the league. And what we did at the time was we were each assigned, or we each volunteered to go and collect the elective results from the town boards. The AP was waiting for our call-in from the town board results. We would gather at the county offices and give our numbers, and then phone it into the AP. Wow. So it was, and I don't think we earned a lot of money, but it was a fundraiser. So that's it for me.
Okay. Well, I have to say that my sister was involved with the same league that you were in Texas, in Lubbock, Texas. So, and I look at my relationship with league is genetic. And the reason I say that is that my grandmother was involved with the suffrage movement in New York City. And in 1920, when the league was formed, she became a member of the league in New York City. And since then, my sisters and I have all joined league. So it's something that is part of our DNA or something like that. And I specifically got involved in league when we were in grad school at Michigan State. And they were doing something on recycling. And this was in the 60s, or in the late 60s, that they were trying to do some things on developing a recycling effort in the city of Lansing. And I was interested in the recycling and that area, and so I ended up joining League at that point. So then when we moved here to Menominee in '72, I just automatically drifted to join League because I knew it did wonderful things. So, so I also had a conversation with Jeanette Danes, who was one of the last, I talked to her this afternoon. She was one of the last presidents of League. And so League was here in the 1970s and 80s and the early 90s. And one of the studies that happened, besides the ones that you talked about, was the idea of studying how a structure for the county should be. Because at that time, there was not a county administrator, that the county board just kind of made the decisions and didn't really have any administrator at the top making final decisions or giving direction or setting an agenda. And so we came out in favor of the county administrator model of government, and that actually ended up happening at that time here in Dunn County.
That must have happened prior to 1990, because that's when I went on the county board and we had an administrator.
Right, but this was in the, I'm not sure exactly where, so it was, I joined in the 70s here, so it was the 70s or 80s that might have taken place, and I don't know the exact dates on that. But one of the things that Jeanette Danes brought up to me, she says, at that time, League was very diverse. There were a lot of Democrats, there were a lot of Republicans. It was a very diverse group of people, and they ended up really coming to consensus, and you talked about consensus, coming to consensus, and some of their viewpoints were very, very conservative, but they were willing to put in a minority report on the consensus, so that was always heard, the minority report was always heard. It wasn't just a consensus, and usually it was a more progressive and a more liberal looking ahead rather than looking at keeping things the same way they were. But there was always a minority report that was given. Several of you mentioned observing. We had observers that observed at county boards, and not just county board meetings, because sometimes things were brought up at county board meetings that had kind of taken place in private, and it hadn't been really at a committee meeting that this had been discussed. So we started going to committee meetings and to county board meetings and the school board meetings, and had observers, had people that would go and bring that information back as we were studying an issue. And I think one of the things that have several of you have brought up is that it was a different time for women. We were home with not working necessarily out of the home, and not for pay. We were working, but not for pay. And we would bring our kids to this meeting. And a couple stories that I remember, for some of you that may have remembered Nancy Miller, who was here in town and was on the school board with you, and her kids, she knew, well, her kids used to play League of Women Voters, when they get together and play. And another story that Jeanette Danes told me is Kara Iverson was part of the League, who's not living in the community, not here anymore. And her son, Ethan Iverson, who some of you might know is the musician that's in New York City. Well, he used to come to these League meetings, and one day he came to Jeanette's house, and they had some little dump trucks and little things, and the kids were in one room and the meeting was in the other room. And eventually Jeanette went to check on him. Well, Ethan had taken the dump truck and taken her pots that she had planted, her indoor plants, had dug the dirt out of it with the dump truck, and made a trail all the way across her rug, and then dumped it and made a little garden area over here. So anyway, some of the things that happened that would you know, it was a different era and a different time. But I think the things that were important was that it was a diverse group of people that had both Democrats and Republicans coming together, talking about issues and making decisions about direction. And I think that that's a real important thing, and still maintaining their nonpartisan as an organization. And the fact that they were involved in study, in observation of what was going on, and it was a lot of local things that were going on. Right now, we're dealing more with state and national issues, and we're not really dealing with some of the local issues that could be part of where we are. So anyway, that's my side. If you've had questions.
Exactly right. Now is the time for questions for any of these ladies.
I have a question. You said that all the people that were candidates responded in the newspaper, or let's say
For the
something
voter
similar.
guide, yes.
Yeah. How did you get that done? I mean, as far as how did you
I
make
think that
that?
they just understood how popular the guide was, and that
Okay.
they didn't want to be listed as non-responsive.
But you know, here in Dunn County, we ended up, the newspaper didn't do anything in this way. And so we, as the league, started asking the questions. We sent out the information to the candidates, and the paper was willing to publish them if we did all the legwork. But they did. And we did get responses from everybody. And I just thought, and then the paper eventually took it over, and we weren't part of the picture anymore. But that's, you know, yeah, it's a different time.
There was no mileage in stonewalling the way there is now.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can wedge that. I don't know what the penalty is for them not, because they know if they don't participate, that it can't go forward without balance. We won't do that. It's very frustrating.
I have another question.
Ask it.
Were you involved with when Wisconsin became a marital property versus
I
common law?
don't remember that at all.
I do. League was involved, you know?
Yeah.
You don't remember that?
No.
I do, yeah, I don't.
Who was it, the name? Celia Lausted.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Was real involved.
Yes.
And she was a member of League.
Yes, she was.
And she brought it up and had us all,
Yep.
I don't know if we took a position on it, but
Oh.
I don't know, but we had some programs on it.
And she campaigned on that statewide. It wasn't just a local issue. She really pushed hard.
How many states are left that are common law? I know Iowa is still.
I wonder if Illinois is. Decided tax plan.
I don't think.
Any more
Illinois is.
questions from the
Not anymore?
peanut gallery here?
Since that's where I grew
Because
up.
I'm in.
Are we out of the frying pan?
Ellen, I have a comment. We also have a sign-up sheet for Vote 411, which is part of the committee that works to gather information from candidates. So if anyone has a burning desire to be on that committee, sign-up's over here. And both Margie and Kit's talked about like attending school board meetings or county board meetings, that sort of thing, and reporting back to the league. That's also an opportunity, and we have a sign-up sheet for that.
Well, and I'm thinking, we talked about that, and I'm thinking that given your input, that we would, the newsletter would very much like the information, but I think people could inform themselves by going to your site and viewing your tapes, they're,
And with a little more money, we could do more.
Yeah.
That's my plug.
right, well, right.
Joan had a question over here.
So when you were initially in leagues, how large were your leagues? How many members? And how did you get the word out? Because now, with all of the social media, how do you get the word out to get people to volunteer or to come and join? What did you do?
No idea.
Well, the thing is, you had a whole bunch of very educated women that were doing childcare.
They wanted a
And
break.
they wanted something where they're using their minds.
Yeah.
And I think that was an avenue for people to come together and challenge ourselves a little bit. Wouldn't you say that that's kind of?
And we had, League at that time had a program that bought subscriptions to the taxpayer information, remember that? And I don't know if that is even functioning any longer, so you knew chapter and verse what Wisconsin taxes were levied and what they were spent on, and who voted which way, instead of some of the whims of.
Do you remember how many members the league had?
We were just talking about, I don't think it was huge. I think at 30.
I have
No,
absolutely no idea.
I'd say that'd probably be more like 50. We actually ended up separating into smaller discussion groups. So that you might have a discussion group, instead of everybody getting together, you might have 10 people that would get together, they were studying education or something, some topic. And you'd get together and you'd actually, in that morning, discuss some issues and have small groups. And then another small group was studying something else. And then they would bring that to the group. So that you didn't have in mass everybody. So I'd say there might have been 50 or 60 people.
And I remember also that when women started going back into the labor force, we would have bag lunches where you could do some of the discussion, so that we accommodated. But ultimately, that.
Well, and also in Lubbock was very much a town gown split town. And these educated women were not being invited to join things like the women's club. And thus, this was another avenue for them to get together with.
Do you have any recollection how many were in your league chapter?
I think there probably were 150 members or something like that.
Your city, of course.
But not too many native Lobbockites. A few.
Lobbockites?
Lobbockites, yes.
Well, one of the things I think that happened in the demise of League in Dunn County is that there ended up being an AAUW, American Association of University Women. And that's a wonderful group, but you need a college education. And you need a college degree to belong to that. And what happened is that group became stronger, and there are people that were in League, and I can think of several people that didn't have a college degree that were the most active, helpful people in League, but they didn't have a college degree, and they weren't able to join an AAUW. And so that became a stumbling block, and I think what happened is AAUW became stronger, and it drained out the women that were, and we kind of ended up folding. I don't know about Eau Claire.
This isn't all that relevant to the league, but nevertheless, Lubbock did have an American Association of University Women chapter. And my small book discussion group, made up of faculty wives, was an affiliate of it, and so I thought we were supposed to join. And so they advertised they advertised their membership tea at the Women's Club and invited people to come and join the AUW. And I came, and the people standing in front of me to pay their membership were asked where they got their degree. And they'd say things like Podunk Hollow Women's College down the road, and they'd say, oh, we're so happy to have you. They got to me, and I said, the University of Illinois. The woman took 3 steps back and said, oh, we don't know if that's an acceptable institution. And then I went to look at the interest groups. And the interest groups, other than our book group, were bridge groups.
Oh.
They were called child development, 1, 2, 3, and 4, but they were bridge groups, and all of these women were grandmothers. They weren't raising small children. And my book group decided we really didn't need to be an affiliate of the AUW. And it pretty much died. That group died. But that reaction, well, all the years that I lived in Lubbock, Texas, and wandered around my 40 and sometimes 70 counties that I was responsible for my agency, people always said, where are you from? So, it's a different place.
And I don't know what happened in Eau Claire, like those of you that are in Eau Claire.
I knew a lady from Eau Claire that was in the league back in the day. And I think that is the story there too. Is that a university group, and I don't know the words their titles were, could be the same situation, but that's exactly what she said.
Yeah.
That they kind of drained out the league and went to the university group at that point in time.
And I guess it's such a shame because there were some really strong, thoughtful women that were in AAUW that didn't have degrees. And I think,
league.
Yeah, I mean in league,
Yeah.
in league. And I just think that we need to be inclusive in.
Well, when we came to Menominee, a couple of years in, I think I joined the AAUW. I didn't know there was a league chapter, and maybe it had just died by that time. But the AAUW chapter then folded up in 2 years because nobody wanted to be the president.
They're struggling this today. I'm a member. I'm 35 years with AAUW Eau Claire, and we really are struggling to keep members, and that it's just difficult.
But no end of people, of my friends around the country have told me what a wonderful organization it is, has been where they are. It just wasn't in Lubbock, Texas.
I liked it when I was in it because I was getting to meet people, which was hard to do with, just moving to this community where it seemed as if everybody I did meet had been born and raised here and their grandparents had too.
But they didn't grapple with the issues
No, I
like
understand that.
like the league does. And that's the strength of the league.
Which brings us to the legislative committee. Anybody who's interested in being an adjunct, you don't need to be the leader, but, the legislative committee is over there.
Sign up.
And we have a legislative representative in Washington DC.
That's right. In a manner of speaking.
Well,
I want to say thank you very much because this was very interesting, plus, educational, plus entertaining. So thank you all. I was aware when I was part of the AAUW that stuff was changing all around us because women were entering the workforce. Whether they had to because of family needs or whether they had to because they had this energy that needed to go somewhere. That was happening and it made it harder for a lot of volunteer organizations. It did. Now, opportunities. And